Architecture taught me to observe better, which I think is just an invaluable skill as a designer. The biggest lesson that I have to impart on students is to keep moving forward. Even if you're feeling critical, even if you're feeling self-doubt.
As a designer, do you think it is necessary to have unique style?
I think a better designer, at
Do
least,
you think that when people are having a drink, there's a more open, more relaxed, and most of the time, hopefully, you learn something from them. So welcome to Conversation Over Wine. I'm Luxxica, and this episode is Wine Over Design. Today we're having a conversation about design, and I'm so excited to be joined by someone who's been a big part in my design journey. It's Rebecca Van Beeck. She began her design journey as an architect before moving into theater design. And she's also a performance designer, artist, and educator. Most of all, she was my teacher back in architecture school, so I think it would be really interesting conversation to explore her journey, how she shifted from architecture into theater design. So, what are you doing lately?
So I'm currently a lecturer in theatre design at the University of Arts London. I coordinate the first year of the course, and I'm also working as a freelance set and costume designer. I went to the Venice Architecture Biennale, moment for me to reflect on how I had left, or how I have left, the architectural profession behind as I've moved into the theatre and performance space. And it was quite a moment for me because I really felt like I'd made the right choice. Going back and seeing all the architects and seeing that world and speaking to all the architects, I sort of left, coming back into the theatre space in London, and I felt like I'd made the right decision doing that.
I'm about to ask you, do you miss architecture? And you just answer me.
I miss the people.
Yeah.
But no, I have no regrets moving into the theatre and performance space. I don't miss being an architect at all.
Before we move on to the next topic, let's pour the wine first. So for tonight, I want you to feel right at home. So I bought a little taste of your hometown. It's Pinotage. And it's a South African signature red grapes. It's a cross between Pinot Noir and Senso. The flavor reminds me a bit of like a Shiraz. And bold, a little smoky, but still smooth.
That's nice. The area Stellenbosch, where it's from, is close to where I grew up. It's about a 40-minute drive from where I grew up. It's one of the sort of well-known wine regions in South Africa. Actually, I'm from the Western Cape, which is a wine region in South Africa.
And the reason I chose this brand is called Cadet. It's a wine label owned by the Canon Cop Estate, which is one of the early adopter of the Pinotage. And the story is that there one professor in the university, he liked the Pinot Noir, but not going well with the climate of South African. So he blended the Pinot Noir with the other grape, which is Cinsault.
It's a famous one, no? It's like a well-known Pinotage, or it's got like, I feel like Canon Cop Cadet has something in my memory. It like feels like it's an important one somehow. Isn't that cute? That's special.
So without the further ado, let's go to the first part.
What's the first part?
The first part is the current design field that you are in is theater design. And so I know you're from the architecture, like kind of, maybe it's your transition from architecture to the theater design. What made you shift from architecture to theater design?
Architecture never really clicked with me right from the start. I actually really wanted to be a chef when I was growing up. And a friend of mine's mum said to me, don't make your passion your career.
Yeah.
At that time, that message felt appropriate. And I also enjoyed design, and architecture was sort of the more obvious choice, I suppose. And then after I graduated, it wasn't the right fit somehow. And I was always looking for this other thing. I didn't know much about theatre. I didn't know what that other thing was. I thought maybe it was installation art. I also did a degree in branding. I thought maybe it was brand, space design. And I always found alternative applications of architecture. So I did work in a traditional practice for a while, but I was always having these sort of side hustles. So like with weird pop-up experimental things on the street, or other space-related projects, designs, etc. And then I had the opportunity of working on a fringe theatre production in my mid-20s that really shifted my attention towards theatre and performance specifically.
Yeah. So you experiment a lot of things. And how can you be so sure about theater design?
Yeah, I don't know. It just really feels like it fits with my personality. I've really enjoyed the people in the industry.
Mhm.
I really enjoy working with liveness, with performing bodies. And I also really enjoy working with a script as a starting point, or if it's an opera, the libretto and the music as a starting point. I feel like it's just so enjoyable. If I look back on the last 10 or so years, I feel like the performance space is really where I will be sitting.
You say like it's that you have the script from the
Not always sort of two standard ways of producing a theatre production that are sort of known in the industry. The most traditional is that you begin with a script or an opera that's already been composed, that exists in the canon, and everybody who's working, the full creative team has that as their reference.
Is it the same way as the designer approached the brief?
Yeah, the brief is more clearly defined when there's a script. And usually at that point, the venue will be clear, the rest of the creative team will be clear, so you'll know which director you're working with, which lighting director you're with, which lighting designer you're working with. So together, and which venue, together that makes up your brief. Yeah, it's usually quite clear from the start. That's in a very traditional working method. But then there's another way of designing for performance, which is called a devised method, where it's more of a sort of collaborative practice. So you define a team, and then across a period of weeks, possibly even months, you are together working and producing a piece of theatre and performance. At that point, the script might not exist. There might be a rough story outline or intention, but only through the collaboration do you define if all of those details clearly. So then the designer does more than just design. The designer will also be involved in the curation of the script. The designer will also potentially be involved in the choreography. It's more of a collaborative way of working, and both practices are quite known in the industry, accepted in the industry, embraced in the industry.
Oh, but as a designer,
Mm-hmm.
a- aside from the people that you are excited to work with them, which process that excite you the most in theater design?
Or there's sort of two favorite moments. The first is when you see the physical built set for the first time, usually in the workshop, and you've just been working on drawings, and then you see everything at 1-to-1. That's a very exciting moment. And then the second exciting moment is when they are performers and the full team come together to start so bringing that set to life.
So it's more like the almost finished part that
Yes, the final, like when the curtain comes up and there's audience in the space, that by that point, the design team will have watched the performance multiple times. It's less exciting for the creative team. It's more like an end point. That's when your job finishes. You're sort of over the line, you get to go home, and then the actors and performers push it forward.
maybe it's the same feeling like when I just go into the studio and I see my piece come out from the cling. It's like that's what excites me the most.
Yeah, so I think at the end of the design process, when everything is still digital, when you're submitting drawings to scale, that's just a feeling of relief. That's just like, oh, I've come to the end of a very challenging process, over to the set builders, over to the production manager. And then that excitement comes back when you see it come out of the kiln for the first time, when you visit the workshop for the first time and there's actually something concrete there. That's a very, very exciting moment.
Is it the fact that we cannot enjoy it until we feel like, oh, I'm relaxed now? So like, wow,
Mm.
like that.
I also find that I can't enjoy a design immediately. I always have to wait for a couple of years, and then I can look back at the work that I did previously and I feel a lot of pride for it. But in the moment, I'm too critical, I'm too embedded, I don't have enough distance. and I just want out. I want the project to complete. But there is still that moment of excitement, throughout the process. It does come in.
How can you be aware of the moment that it's like, well, you become too critical for your word or yourself right now? How do you deal with that and how you be aware of
It is just the fact that I'm aware of it. Like, I'm aware that criticism and that sort of self-doubt is a part of a designer's process always. I think it takes a particular personality to be able to put those feelings aside and still continue on and still persevere through the design work. Now, as a teacher, I feel like that's the biggest lesson that I have to impart on students, is to keep moving forward. Even if you're feeling critical, even if you're feeling self-doubt, it's just about taking the next step and the next step and the next step. And you might not know where it's leading, but there will be that moment to reflect and refine. But you have to have continued along that path before you can reflect and refine. It's easier said than done. I'm telling all my students, go, go, go. And if I'm in a design process, it's equally as challenging. But I just think that it's important to balance the process, the making, the doing, the intuitive work with the rational thinking, critiquing side of design. And I think that I feel like there's a lot of emphasis on one over the other at the moment in this time. I don't know, maybe not.
what if it's not about to be rational or to be like so imaginative?
Yeah.
It's about you have to know what are you doing. For the example, you just design to make people feel something. Maybe you don't need so much reason behind that. You just have to create something that you feel about it. Then you hope that people feel the same way that you feel.
Yes. In the theatre industry, that kind of approach is more supported than in the architectural industry. And I suppose that it's maybe just on account of the scale of the work. When you're designing a skyscraper or even a double-story residential house, the budgets, the timeline, the longevity of those decisions are vastly different to a theatre performance and the limits set within those. As a result of that, you have more freedom as a designer to be a bit wacky and experimental, which is, I suppose, why I'm so drawn to that industry, because it gives me more freedom to think less. And I feel like when I think more, I become very critical and I become very closed and locked, and I find the design process very challenging and not enjoyable, very stressful. You've also moved away from architecture.
I think this thing make me feel like comfortable. They need to have like specific thing still, but you can have a lot more freedom. And
yeah, the areas on that defined, the budgets are more defined, the limits are more defined, the scale is more defined as well.
yeah,
But within those, you can create freely.
yes. Maybe we need to mention this. When I was in the architecture schools, I was her student. So the way we train is in one semester, we will be one-on-one a lot with our instructor. So I think you guys kind of know like our style and the way we work. And one day Ajarn walked into me. I can't remember what you asked me, and then you told me, I don't think you match with the architecture. I don't think you will be like so enjoying with the architecture field. And then you say like, why don't you try like branding?
I do think you would make an excellent architect as well.
Yeah.
But maybe at that point in time, branding was a good option for you, and it seems to have worked out, or it seems to be an interesting path for you at the moment. Yeah, designing big buildings, it looks simple because often they follow a repeating logic, but it's very complicated and very challenging to get all of those pieces, the structure, the substructure, the plumbing, the electrics, the circulation, the fire exits, the lifts,
I hate
that water. It's very complicated. And then there's the contextual analysis. It's really hard to make not just good buildings, but buildings that stand up, buildings that work really well. It's very, very challenging to get those sorts of things right. And I do think that both of us would be capable of doing it, but we wouldn't enjoy the process.
No. I feel like I don't enjoy a single moment in the construction class. I when I was at school, I can't wait to go to the studio session.
No, same for me when I was studying. I do really enjoy working out how things fit together, which is construction. Before I was teaching, I was working full time at an opera house in Lewis, outside of Brighton. It's a really big opera house. I think it's the second biggest opera house in the UK, but it's in the middle of nowhere. So picture Downton Abbey with an opera. And I worked there for 2 years in their technical department in their drawing office as a draftsperson. And that was also a really wonderful experience. I learned a lot. I'm not against that rational world at all, but I do feel like in my own practice, I need the creative, free, intuitive, weird, wacky things as well.
I think is that the reason why you enjoy theater design, because you have to make it real, but it doesn't mean that you have to bring the real world into the stage and make it real. You can just bring something from the other universe and make it real for the audience. Is that the aspect?
Yeah,
you also learn?
much more creative, yeah. I mean, it sometimes is very practical. The director's view is quite influential. If they just want something that looks like a very real city street with people wearing normal clothes, then you would design that world for them. But that's also quite fun.
Yeah, you mentioned a little bit about the COVID time, that back then in your master degree time that you did your thesis, but in theater design you have to plan everything and plan the stage, right? But then the COVID came.
Oh, yes.
How you convert from the real world to like something digital.
Yeah, so that was a disruptive moment. Our class had spent the first half of the year experimenting, designing, thinking about that live performance, preparing for that live performance, and then COVID hit. And we had to readapt everything to be online in our bedrooms. And I did, and I hated it at the time. It was very, very challenging. It was very disappointing, but it forced me to upskill. It forced me to learn digital tools that I'd never considered, and I probably wouldn't have ever engaged with had it not been for lockdown. I invented a Zoom performance, and I hacked Zoom so that I had multiple versions of myself in the call, which was quite fun. So I sort of was having a conversation with myself, and for periods of time, the audience didn't know which of those selves was live. And it was also participatory. It was centered around designing a costume as a performance. And then I also had a version that was using an online VR platform. And I also experimented with the live streaming on Twitch. So I sort of saw my bedroom as my studio space, and I live streamed that space for a full day. It was sort of tasting my endurance. It was sort of seeing how people would be contributing to my design process throughout that 12-hour period. Eventually, I just ended up eating popcorn in front of the camera. It was like a interesting thing to reflect on. But those skills that I learned in that process was why I got my first design commission. Because during COVID, very few designers were equipped with those digital skills. And as a recent graduate, there was no work in the live performance industry. And somebody recommended me to make a opera film, it's the film that we're now turning into a live performance. But that skill set definitely positioned me in a new space, actually. And now my official title in my current teaching role is lecturer in theatre design digital practices, because I've got this specialization as a result. I've sort of learned these strange tools, and I've upskilled myself, and I've applied those tools into the performance space. And that was all on account of COVID.
For the next part, part two, we're gonna talk about architecture. I remember when the first day I go to the architecture school, and even in the first year, all the teachers just ask us like, what is the meaning of the architecture? They never answer us, they just keep asking us. Today, I want to ask you first, what is your meaning of architecture?
So I've thought about it, and I've even written some notes here. Because my first reaction was buildings, and I knew that that was the wrong answer. But the term built environment for me is more appropriate because it is the environments that humans make for actions and activities of humans, animals, and machines.
So, Ajarn.
That's my definition of architecture. What's yours?
I read it too, just in case I got asked. So, mine is also not the building. So, any atmosphere space that when they interact with people, it have a power to shape the way people behave and think.
Very impressed.
I think today we talk a lot about my time in the architecture school, but what about your time in your architecture school? How it make you feel out of the sleepless night?
Lots of sleepless nights as well. I made some really important and good friendships in architecture school. I really enjoyed the first half of architecture school, year 1 and year 2, year 3. As soon as everything became very real and based in very real contexts, I just found it less exciting and less fun. It was real pressure to perform, and there was genuinely always a threat that you would fail. So there was a lot of sort of stress and sleepless nights, which I think isn't particularly productive.
So, if you could go back in time and give the advice to that version of you or the design student right now, what kind of advice you gonna give to them?
Definitely to care less. I think that grades at undergraduate level don't really have much of an impact in your professional life.
Yeah.
And I think that there's more, university for me should be more about learning and really enjoying that learning process rather than meeting the brief and doing what I was meant to be doing. And you?
Just enjoy and experiment a lot. A lot.
Mm. I had the opportunity to come back as a student in my 30s, and it was just a completely different experience when I studied here in London, when I did my master's here. Maybe it was for you as well, but I just was so much more relaxed. I was there to learn. I was so interested in everything I was doing. I was so excited by everything. I wanted to read, I wanted to engage, I wanted to grow. And I sort of wish I had that attitude in my undergraduate as well, but it was a different experience, a different time. I was, a different person.
Is there a building or space you have experienced that completely changed how you think about design?
After I graduated, I received a research grant, which I used to travel in Ethiopia for 2 months. It had a very big impact on my life, I suppose. And actually, so there's the tourist route up north where you see all the rock-hewn churches. But the memory that actually came to mind when you asked that question was we went south and we went to a small village. We saw these vernacular huts, and inside the hut, so there were these tall, sort of beehive-like structures, and at the center was the fire, and that smoke was used to preserve foods and food products that were hanging above the smoke. And there were areas for a couple of livestock, and then the seating areas and the communal areas all within the hut space. And it just really made an impression on me because I'd never sort of seen a vernacular architecture like that before. I never really thought about how I lived in relation to how other people lived, and how our homes we take for granted. And at the same time, I was listening to an audiobook called The Short History of the Home, and it was about where sort of Western style houses evolved across time. So I was listening to like the history of the hall, the history of the bedroom, the history of the kitchen, and then I was visiting a hut where everything was happening in a vastly different sort of way. And that made a lot of, I don't know, it just changed the way I thought about space, I suppose. Yeah.
This, I just thought like I haven't heard the term vernacular architecture for a while. How far I am from that field right now.
Me neither. I haven't said that word in a long time.
So back to school. When you enter the architecture school, I don't know, is it that my school or is like everybody's? Everyone kind of have their favorite architect. So I just want to ask, who is your favorite architect back then?
When I started studying architecture, my favorite architect was Frank Gehry, who did all the deconstructivist, crazy shaped buildings. I wrote a little cute essay about Frank Gehry when I was in high school. And then I got to architecture school and I was told that Frank Gehry was not cool. You weren't allowed to like any of his work. He was heavily criticized in South Africa. People were talking about how terrible all his buildings were. And I was like, what? I don't know. I'm not too sure how I feel about that. And then when I graduated, I'd obviously been heavily influenced by all the conversations and the teachers around me. And I'd sort of shifted to being more interested in local South African architects. And my favorite South African architect, he actually recently passed away and I had the opportunity to work for him, was a man called Julian Cook, who was one of my professors. And he just had this very wonderful ability to like resolve interesting technical details, and he was also just really nice. So I shifted from like a big American architect to a local practice in South Africa.
We mentioned a little bit earlier about like the architecture that shaped the way people perceive. I think because when we have to design some architecture, we have to do the work to understand the people. So for you, how do you think architecture helped you to understand people more in a different way?
Architecture taught me to observe better, to look at the city, to look at spaces, to analyze the way that people use spaces, and to become like hyper aware of those details, which I think is just an invaluable skill as a designer, to become observant of activity and of space.
Okay, so far we talk about the work itself, like theater design, maybe a little bit of product design and architecture design. We all talk about the work, but I think it will be also interesting if we talk about the people who design. And what I find fascinating is like the way we call that people is changed through the time. For example, before Bauhaus, the word designer never exists. They just been called, follow what they do. So what I want to ask you is, what do you call yourself now?
And I've struggled with that question. Even calling myself an architect after I graduated was contentious because I hadn't completed the 6-year degree. I only did 5 years. And in South Africa, you could only professionally call yourself an architect once you've done all 6, but it just felt so strange and limiting. Now I define myself as a second costume designer, but again, my work is very interdisciplinary. I work across the fields of performance, architecture, exhibition design, art. So it's hard to sort of fall into a specific category. I suppose actually I'm leaning more recently to the term interdisciplinary designer, but designer is definitely a part of the title. The designer for me is definitely part of who I am and what I do.
So as a designer, do you think it is necessary for them to have their unique style?
I think a better designer, at least in the performance space, is one that doesn't lean on a particular style too heavily, is someone who can work across genres, work across styles. I think that in any designer's practice, you can't avoid your preference. You can't avoid your style. But some designers are more able to engage in different aesthetics than others. I aspire to be a designer who can design music video for a pop group and then equally find the right language needed for opera from the 1800s. I would want to be able to be adaptable like that.
I found that part for me. I admire the one who can do that too.
It's challenging to like put yourself into someone else's shoes and suddenly put yourself into a different generation even. and you're still from where you come from. You can't get rid of your point of view, but you can be aware of it.
I think it's already say that the design quite reflect who we are or what we believe as a people.
Yes, always, whether you wanted to or not.
But what do you think it reflects more? Who do we believe as a people or who do we want to become?
Ooh, interesting. Not one or the other. I think both. But I think who we want to become is something don't necessarily acknowledge enough. You think that you are being unique, or you think that you are designing with your voice, but you're also referencing those around you who you admire.
Do you have any suggestion for the young designer that they feel so stressed that I need to have my own signature, I need to have my own style?
It will come. It's there whether you think it is or not. Be less critical. Trust your intuition, which is also a power, and have less self-doubt. Your style is there. Your style is in your handwriting. Your style is in the marks that you make. Your style is in the choices you make. I think that the signature is different though, because in a product design setting, it is important to stand out from the crowd. It is important to differentiate depending on where in the industry you sit. But as a theatre designer, you are needing to come up with innovative ideas, but those innovative ideas are driven by less of the need to have a signature and more of the need to design for a particular script, performance, dance, opera. What do you think?
I think the style at the end of the day is not just about the visual. There is also the way that we approach our work. Like the writer, they know visual, they just way they write, the way they tell the story. And I think that also the style of the designer too. So I feel like as a designer, a lot of time we do attach to our work, whether it's like the initial idea, the process, or the final result. Do you notice this in your own like practice?
I think I've really worked hard at detaching myself from my work. I find that my work really improves when I let go. I think that not holding on to one's ideas and being open to how those ideas will change through collaboration and the contribution of others is just for me a very exciting process.
I think we talk a lot about the design today. And the last thing I want to ask you is like, what is the thing you learn as a designer and you think it is useful for the younger designer or the people who are interested to become a designer?
I think it's just being open to learning all the time and being a nice person. I think sometimes you can get caught up in a little bit of like a power play where you're trying to speak to the right people or do the right things or meet the right people or progress your career by like being a bit nasty. And I think that a lot of good can also come out of just being an empathetic, kind, and generous human who's willing to admit their mistakes and who's willing to be messy sometimes and not do everything right all the time. And that you realize that we're all actually in that together. And then I think some like really good work and some good collaborations and some wonderful experiences can come out of that too.
Nice. So thank you so much for joining me in a very first episode of my
Pleasure.
podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. It was so nice to see you. You've had me drink way too much chai, and it's been an absolute pleasure chatting. I feel like there's so much more that we could be talking about. Yeah, some really interesting conversation. Thank you.
Yes, I learned a lot today, and the experience of drinking wine is not always about the wine itself. That was a me. So thank you. Before we end, I want to thank you so much for watching, especially watching to this point. This is my very first episode that I filmed last year, so there will be a lot of mistake, a lot of error and excitement, as you can see in the clip. Because of those imperfections, I keep pushing this project aside. So recently, I read something about when we were a kid and we have that sticker book that we try to save for a perfect moment to use it, and we end up never using them. And I really don't want this project to be one of that sticker books. So I decided to pushing this thing forward and really make it happen, even it's not that perfect yet. But there will be more episodes, and I promise it will keep getting better. So please stay tuned and see you next time. Bye.